Hi guys, it's Miss Fogarty again. We are doing lesson 2 of the Human Body Listening and Learning series. There are 5 vocab words we're on the hunt for today. The first one is bacteria. When you hear the word bacteria in the story, when you hear any vocab words in the story, make sure you're tapping your head. That lets me and the other teachers know that you're catching it and you understand what it means. The first word is bacteria. They're very small living things. They're not visible with our naked eye. Some of the dangerous bacteria can cause diseases. The second word is lenses. Lenses is a curved piece of glass used in magnifying glasses or microscopes. The third vocab word we're looking for today is magnifies. When something appears larger than it really is, it's magnified. So if we're looking at something really, really small under a magnifying glass, it appears larger. Then we have the word microscope. Microscope is just a magnifying instrument used to view very small objects. And the last word is observations. Observation is information that we gather by watching something or someone. So when we hear any of those 5 vocab words when we're reading the story, we're going to tap our heads like this, and that's going to tell me that you're catching it, you're understanding what it means, and you're listening to it in the story. All right. Hi, boys and girls. Last time we were together, I said that I would tell you about Antoine van Leeuwenhoek today. So I plan to do that. But first, I want to tell you a story about me. When I was about your age, one day my father came home with a present for me under his arm. When I first opened it, I wasn't sure what it was. It looked like this. Do you know what this is called or what it does? Shout it out at the screen if you know what this is. My father explained to me that it was a microscope. That was nothing I'd ever dreamed of wanting. I spent most of my time playing outside and I could barely sit still long enough to read a book. Why would I want this funny-looking instrument? You are so curious about everything. I thought perhaps you'd like to see what a butterfly wing looks like close up, my father said. This is what a butterfly wing looks like under a microscope. I peered or peeked through the lens, or a curved piece on the magnifying glass of the microscope, and I saw tiny little veins and hairs on the butterfly wing. I looked at insect eyes and blades of grass. I looked at oak leaves and dead bumblebees and toy soldiers. It was the best present I had ever received. Have you ever used a magnifying glass? Who can tell me what a magnifying glass is used for? Yes, it magnifies objects. It makes objects look hundreds of times larger than they really are. It shows things that are too small for the human eye to see alone. Sometimes people use magnifying glasses to read really small print or to find splinters buried deep beneath their skin. Well, a microscope is a lot like that, but it's much more powerful. So, what does that have to do with Antoine? Well, just like me at 7 years old, the year I received my first microscope, Antoine was very curious. He also had a fascination with magnifying objects. Although Antoine was not a scientist, his work with microscopes changed the way people thought about the human body and how it works. At 16, Antoine began working in the textile business or cloth business. His shop sold cloth, buttons, sewing supplies, ribbons, and lace. His customers were very particular, expecting the very best textiles or cloth for their suits and their dresses. Antoine used a magnifying glass to make sure that the threads on the cloth were straight and tightly woven. His customers appreciated Antoine's careful observations. Observations, remember, are made when you look closely at something with detail. When he was about 13 years old, Antoine took a trip from his home in Holland to nearby England, where he discovered a book called Magnographia or Micrographia, meaning small images. Written by Robert Hooke, the book was full of drawings and descriptions of objects seen under a microscope. Antoine was fascinated or in awe of how large and detailed the micro or small objects looked when looking through the lens of a microscope. It was something it was a little like someone with poor eyesight putting an eyeglass lens for the first time and discovering that a blurry tree in the distance was actually made up of individual leaves. He couldn't wait to get home to experiment with his objects. So this is similar to if you wear glasses now, what your vision looked like without them. I have contacts in, and without my contacts, everything around me is very blurry, and I can't tell the fine detail that exists in front of my face. But as soon as I put my glasses on or my contacts in, I see a whole new world of detail. This is what he's describing under the microscope. If you pick up, this picture right here that we're on right now is a close-up of a lice. So a head lice. When people get lice, it's in their hair. This is a close-up of what lice looks like. If you had one in your hand, which would be kind of creepy, and you looked at it, you can't see the fine details of the hairs on its legs or its eyes or its back. You can't see those details unless you're looking under a microscope. So this is what he's describing, how his whole world opened up when he could see what things really looked like close up. This is a picture of Antoine's microscope. Looks a lot different than the present that Nick got in the beginning of the story. Upon his return to Holland, Antoine began to build his own single-lens microscope. He shaped his lens very carefully, grinding them down with sand and polishing them smooth with putty or powder. Antoine's simple microscopes magnified objects from 50 to 100 times their natural size. So he made his own microscope, which is super cool. Antoine had been interested in science and nature ever since he was a boy, and now he had the opportunity to study nature at a close-up range. He carried squiggly worm-like insect larvae around in his pocket, eager to watch the entire life cycle of insects with the aid of a microscope. So he wants to watch that insect transform into its stages, which we've talked about in previous listening and learning lessons, underneath the microscope and see it close up rather than far away. Ooh, this is super cool. This is a picture of a mosquito under a microscope. So little baby mosquitoes flying around, we don't understand, we can't see the detail that exists on their body because they're teeny tiny, but under a microscope, they have a lot of detail to them. Using the microscope he made for himself, he studied people's skin, mosquito wings, and sheep hair. He observed duck hearts, fish scales, cow eyes, and water bugs. What a strange man, other people thought. But this patient man was driven by his curiosity, and he wanted to learn more. He never lost interest in the scales on the gnat's wings or the hairs of a fly. He looked at the same things again and again, comparing, measuring, and recording his findings. Does anyone have an idea of what they think this might be? Shout it out at your screen now. Antoine conducted many experiments with water, drinking water from his well, water from lakes, and water from the sea, rain, and melted snow. He discovered what looked to him like tiny little animals in the lake water. He called these little animals animalcules. Antoine claimed he saw even more animalcules swimming around in the rainwater. They were everywhere, he said. He estimated or guessed that 1,000 of these tiny creatures could fit in the head of a pin. So think about a thumbtack, or think about the pins that you hang things to the wall with. He said there's thousands of those, or hundreds of those, on a single pinhead, which is crazy to think how small these little things actually are. People called him a liar and a magician, thinking that he was quite mad or crazy. So people just thought he was kind of crazy, that he was nuts. But he was actually a scientist. But in fact, Antoine was not crazy at all. His little animals were not really little animals, but they were definitely alive. He was the first to observe and record and describe many tiny living things in nature not visible with the naked eye, including bacteria or germs. In other words, bacteria can't be seen with the naked eye. We can't look at our hand and see the germs and the bacteria on them. They're too small to see, but they're there and they're alive. Many scientists believe that these tiny forms of life have been on Earth for more than 3 billion years. They surround us in the water, in the air, and on land. But no one was aware of their existence before Antoine recorded what he saw. He discovered a whole new world. Ever curious, Antoine began studying the saliva from inside his mouth, so the spit in his mouth. He discovered even more bacteria. He found that the sticky coating on the outside of his teeth was crawling with millions of organisms or living things. You have them too, but don't worry, they won't hurt you. You'll learn more about them another day. Antoine kept a journal or a writing book, and he recorded his detailed observations. He made friends with 2 English doctors who belonged to England's Royal Society of England. They told him that their fellow English scientists kept similar journals to share their discoveries, and they invited Antoine to share his work with them. And so, for the next 50 years, Antoine sent hundreds of letters to England. His letters described in great detail the tiny structures he saw under his homemade microscope. He discovered fungus on stale bread, the stingers, eyes, and mouths of a bee, even tiny head lice. Because he could not draw well, Antoine hired someone to draw or illustrate his writings. The English Society loved everything he sent, and they published or sent out his letters for others to read. So this is a picture we saw. The blue microscope is what a microscope actually looks like today. And the first microscope Antoine ever got to use was one that he created himself. It's the one on the right side. So look at the difference between what Antoine had when he was first discovering things and what Nick got as a gift from his dad. Antoine did not invent the microscope, nor was he the first to use one. But he used his own simple microscope more than what most people had that day. Compared to modern microscopes, Antoine's was very simple indeed. It was even more simple than other microscopes used in his day. The entire instrument was only 3 to 4 inches long and had to be held up close to the eye. So 3 to 4 inches long is probably only that big. So his microscope was that big compared to a giant one that would now sit on your table. Antoine's microscope used only one lens. Modern microscopes have 2 or more lenses, one in each eyepiece that you look through, and at least one lens at the bottom of the tube or barrel to enlarge things even more. Today, objects are put on glass slides to be viewed. These objects remain in one place. It is the lens that moves, not objects. Instead of keeping the objects in one place, Antoine mounted his objects on the end or the sharp pointed pin sticking up in the front of the lens and moved the objects inside of the lens. Antoine's invention required good lighting and great patience for use. His lenses were the clearest and the most powerful lenses in his time, But he never shared his secret for creating them. No one